serial killers, college, phone calls, jobs. No, just stay home, never leave. Then you won't get murdered by a stranger.
Even though you're in your house and you will get murdered by a stranger if you have a phone.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Even the most folklorically out-of-touch American has probably heard the urban legend called the Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. You know, the one that created the famous idiom, "The call is coming from inside the house." That's because, at least in my view, it is urban legend number one, the classic of all classics, and certainly my favorite when I was a kid. The urban legend that is Sarah Marshall of the podcasts You're Wrong About and You Are Good joins me today as I share my scholarly presentation that I will pedantically refer to as New Perspectives on the Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. I'll share some new ideas about where this tale comes from, focused on the decades-long epidemic of obscene phone calls women were suffering through in the 1960s, as the way that the telephone worked was rapidly changing. Sarah and I will also discuss a sensational true crime story that could have offered up a grain of truth to the tale, and how, in my opinion, this urban legend was the most important driving force behind the creation of the entire slasher film genre. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. Okay, dear listeners, we are coming in super hot today with what I think is probably the most famous American urban legend of all time. And I'm very excited to welcome Sarah Marshall, the only person that I could really, truly get into this topic with. So, Sarah, thank you.
That means so much to me. My gosh. Because we both used to read Snopes.com for fun in 2003, I bet.
Of course. Yeah. Yes, of course.
Where else are you going to find out information in the age of the war on terror?
So I think to start, basically what I'm going to do today is show you my hypothesis about kind of what might have inspired this legend beyond kind of the typical things that we hear folklorists talk about. You know, we're building.
I'm thrilled because I love it, because we are going like 90s, you know, Candyman, Silence of the Lambs, like going into the microfiche.
Yes.
For this one. And I'm forming a hypothesis. And this is the most exciting thing to me.
We are microfishing.
Yeah, we're Clarice Starling core. Here's the thing. The Silence of the Lambs is terrible. I mean, it's a very well-made movie. I love Jonathan Demme. There are many great things about it. It is like inarguably horrifically transphobic and like basically a hate crime.
Of course.
But like, I just want to scoop Jodie Foster right out of it. Just scoop. Just like,
yep, scoop her.
Save her, you know, because Clarice is the most wonderful person who's ever lived. I love her so much.
She really is.
I want to marry Clarice and take care of her. There, I said it.
There you said it.
We're going to do the opposite of Will Graham.
Yep, it's
where you go to the doctor all the time when you can't read a clock.
No, we love Clarice, even though she's a cop.
Yeah,
but that's okay.
Not anymore.
No, not
Clarice
anymore.
is doing like family therapy at this point in time, I think. But I'm so excited about this because this is, I'm sure we talked about this before, but I think this is my favorite urban legend.
Me too. It's got to be.
And another one that, and I know you probably have a time plan to talk about this and like other urban legends. We've talked about this elsewhere. I never get tired of it. But like the other one that this immediately makes me think of when I'm like, this is my favorite, and one that might be another contender, and I think for some of the same reasons thematically, and we can maybe talk about this later, is the story many of us know as Humans Can Lick Too.
Oh, that is a classic. I bet that's the first urban legend that I heard and like,
wow,
remembered as a kid. That feels like the one. And yeah, I think we should maybe wrap a bit on babysitter stories at the end here as well.
Yeah.
So let's make sure that all of our listeners, in case they're living on fucking Mars, don't know this urban legend.
In case your parents eat salad.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought I would share the version that I heard growing up.
Yeah.
And that was the one that was in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I might ask you what your variations are in like the way that you know the legend.
Mm-hmm.
But I will begin with a reading from the beautiful text that kind of kicked off my love of everything, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, by Alvin Schwartz. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Everybody was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. There were Richard, Brian, Jenny, and Doreen, the babysitter. The telephone rang. "Maybe it's your mother," said Doreen. She picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, a man laughed hysterically and hung up. "Who was it?" asked Richard. "Some nut," said Doreen. "What did I miss?" At 9:30, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. It was the man who had called before. "I'll be there soon," he said, and he laughed and hung up. "Who was it?" the children asked. "Some crazy person," she said. About 10 o'clock, the phone rang again. Jenny got to it first. "Hello," she said. It was the same man. "One more hour," he said, and he laughed and hung up.
Ooh.
He said 1 more hour. What did he mean? Asked Jenny. "Don't worry," said Doreen. "It's somebody fooling around." "I'm scared," said Jenny. About 10:30, the telephone rang once more. When Doreen picked it up, the man said, "Pretty soon now," and he laughed. "Why are you doing this?" Doreen screamed, and he hung up. "Was it that guy again?" asked Brian. "Yes," said Doreen. "I'm going to call the operator and complain." The operator told her to call back if it happened again, and she would try to trace the call. At 11 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. "Very soon now," the man said, and he laughed and hung up. Doreen called the operator. Almost at once, she called back. "That person is calling from a telephone upstairs," she said. "You'd better leave. I'll get the police." Just then, a door upstairs opened. A man they had never seen before started down the stairs toward them. As they ran from the house, he was smiling in a very strange way. A few minutes later, the police found him there and arrested him.
Well, I'm glad that didn't escalate any further, because in some versions it does.
I guess it's because it's a children's version of the story.
Yeah, although there's a lot of stories in that book that there are things, sometimes when you marry a girl and she always wears the same ribbon, if you ever take it off her head, it will fall off too.
A classic. But yeah, I think that I always found this version to be really freaky. I think as a child, like, realizing that there's this thing of like the most evil among us, like laughing at our fear, right? It's like this amusement to them. And that's so much scarier than just like, I don't know, a murder that we learn about that just feels just straight up scary. I don't know. There's just something more to it there. But what about you, Sarah? How did you encounter this legend, and like, what was your variation on it? Because there are many.
Yeah. I'm sure that I did first encounter it in a kind of like Snopes straight dope capacity of like reading about urban legends. And I did read, I think I had The Vanishing Hitchhiker when I was a teenager too. And I can't remember if maybe I'm thinking of a version from that. Who's the author of that?
Jan Brunvand, my favorite.
Yeah. He's like a legend in urban legend studies, basically. Urban legend.
He basically popularized the genre. He took it from kind of the academic contemporary folklore arena and put it into words that just anyone could understand. And it became, he was like criticized for being like poppy about the way he wrote about urban legends, which is kind of what we do, Sarah. So
yeah, and also it's not like it's physics or something, like it's not dumbing it down to sort of address it, in sort of a funny, accessible way.
I agree.
Yeah. And the version I remember encountering where I would do this kind of double bluff of like, oh, I'm interested in these stories academically. They're so interesting. But also I was like, I want to feel scared, but I also want to have there be like analysis on either side of it so I don't get too scared, you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I feel like many of us do that currently in different ways.
I mean, I've been rewatching a lot of MST3K lately, and it's funny to think about being like 11 years old, and I would get up at 6 a.m. because that was where it came on, when it came on in Hawaii on Saturdays, which took an incredible amount of discipline for me. And I remember there being some movies that they showed that legitimately scared me. And one of them was a very low budget, fairly boring horror movie called The Screaming Skull that had a very classic William Castle gambit at the start of it, where they have like a coffin or a casket with, I think, a skeleton in it. And they're like, anyone who dies of fright while watching this movie will be sent a free casket by the studio. And I remember being like, but what if I do die, you know?
They just like mentioned that you could.
Yeah. So like inside of me forever is that kid who's like, but what if this movie does kill me?
Free coffin. Death's expensive.
Free coffin. It's a good deal. Yeah. But what about burial? You know, that's where they really get you.
That's true.
But the version I remember is the babysitter has put the kids to bed and she keeps getting these calls from this guy who keeps saying, have you checked the children? And she's like, what are you talking about? And he keeps calling and they do the tracing the call thing. And the operator says, the call is coming from inside the house. And she's running away because she like runs upstairs to try and save the kids, but he got them. They're already dead. And he chases her out the door. And I don't remember as much emphasis as there kind of is in the version you just read me on the kids having instincts that something's wrong and the babysitter being a little bit dismissive of that.
Yeah.
But I just love that story because it's like so kind of brutal and like terrifying, and also sort of like a story where there's like this sort of uncontrollable menace directed at teenage girls. And when you're a teenage girl, you're like, yeah, that is how this feels. So yeah.
Yep. There's a lot of, it's a rich text, I think, when we go back and look at the time period where it's forming, which we will.
Yeah. And it works. It's a dumb story, but it's a scary story.
Yeah, it's really scary. I mean, yeah, in a lot of the versions, the kids are like fully chopped up in the room. Like it can it like really runs the...
Like SpaghettiOs with meat, to quote Adventures in Babysitting.
Exactly. Ew. God, someone was talking about SpaghettiOs recently, and I really thought they were an invention of the 90s, and boy, was I wrong.
How old are they? Like 1890s?
Not quite that.
Are they a Chef Boyardee thing?
Let's see. Yes. SpaghettiOs.
I love SpaghettiOs. I grew up eating a lot of SpaghettiOs because I was raised by my dad. So there you go. SpaghettiOs and chicken ramen. So much sodium.
Yeah, no kidding. I just looked it up, and SpaghettiOs was invented in 1965, which is right around the time that our legend was formed.
Well, there you go.
It's got to be related, and I will be creating an episode about it.
There are some really good canned spaghetti commercials from the 60s, I'll say.
Oh, I bet. No, I mean, the amount of SpaghettiOs I ate was absurd.
There's one of like a child being called home by his mom in the North End in Boston, and she's like, Anthony, because it's like Prince Spaghetti Night. It's beautiful. It's like Fellini or something.
Wow. I remember having a dream where I had so many serial killer dreams growing up, which is probably because of the media I consumed.
I didn't have as many as you would think I did.
But in one dream, I was like wrestling a killer in like immense gore, like a pool of gore that like looked like SpaghettiOs. So do with that what you will.
Kind of like The Descent.
Yeah, kind of like The Descent, actually. Great movie.
Yeah, it really is. And okay, so we're talking mid-60s here for when this emerges?
Yes. I think that like most urban legends, it's not certain, but it was concretely formed by the late 60s, right? There's like people were actually telling it. There's record of it by then. But because of the way that urban legends form, we got to look kind of in the preceding maybe decade, right? To see what was going on and why that legend might have been formed, how it was formed, and then
how it gradually bubbled up.
Exactly. How it got to the point where it was a solidified narrative. So we're going to be hanging out in the early to mid 60s today. Are you ready for that?
Love it. Yes.
Okay, great.
Hi, Peggy.
Hi. A lot of the conversation around this legend has always been about the loss of the mother from the home, right? The kind of anti-feminist message of your children are unsafe when left in the care of someone who is not the mother. And there's this sort of punishment around that, a backlash, like a kind of a moralistic backlash tale to the rise of feminism in a way, right? And so
because if women leave the home, then everyone else will die.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like, that's the sociological way that we often look at it. And I think there's plenty to that. But I also think that what is overlooked in a lot of ways, though not always, but I think overlooked in a way that I'll explain today, is the central aspect of the telephone. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the phone really quick.
Yeah. My greatest fear.
When you were growing up, what was your relationship to the landline telephone?
Well, yeah, I loved the phone because we had one of those big chunky white plastic ones, like people had. And that was so ergonomic to fit between your ear and your shoulder. And I was allowed to have really long calls with my best friend. And we would talk for like 4 hours sometimes. And we would watch Lifetime movies over the phone together. I spent many hours on the landline with my friends. I had a cell phone starting when I was a junior in high school, but I never used it because it was for emergencies.
Of course, yes.
So I only started using it when I went to college in 2006. And so the landline was just like where my life happened. And it's also, I was just like looking at commercials from the 90s, and I love how many kind of core memories that people our age have of commercials and people older than us too, are for commercials just about the phone and how to use it, right? Because there's 1-800-CALLATT, 1-800-COLLECT. There's star 69 as a concept, which was very exciting when it got rolled out, which is you dial star 69 and the phone redials whoever called you last.
Which would have been really helpful in our urban legend today.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes. They should have done a commercial based on that, and maybe they did.
That would have been really good.
Yes.
If they just were like one call and you just star 69 it and they're like, problem solved. It's great. Could be really good.
Well, it's like they had a commercial in the Sydney Olympics that was pulled after there was a big outcry. But it was this woman going into a cabin and being attacked by a classic Jason-esque slasher guy with a mask and a jumpsuit. And he's chasing her with a chainsaw. And then she's just booking it. She's clearly like a good runner. And she's just sprinting. And he gets winded really fast and falls over. And then the tagline is, "Why sport? You'll live longer. Nike." And that got pulled for being misogynistic, allegedly. But I thought it was fucking great. And I based my entire career on it. So, yeah.
I guess that's a third wave feminism vibe.
Yes.
It's not perfect.
But one of its better moments, maybe. But yeah, it just feels like this whole story has it makes sense that it's been informed by a lot more than we can immediately trace, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. No pun intended with your trace. All right. So we're going to just do a little teeny history on the phone during the time.
Oh, boy.
That our legend was forming.
Is Edison going to come into this?
No.
Okay, good.
We're only focusing today on the, decade or so preceding our legend.
Yeah.
So throughout the 1950s, having an actual telephone in your house was becoming more and more common. In 1945, 45% of Americans had one. By 1957, 75%. And then it ticked up to 95% in 1970s. So
So that's a giant jump, really.
It's a golden era, right? This is the golden era of the telephone.
Yeah.
And it is a symbol of freedom in a lot of ways for our teenage girls who are also the stars of our urban legend as the babysitter, right?
Because who is the most famous demographic known for using the phone? Teenage girls.
Teenage girls.
How dare they communicate with each other?
It's dangerous. But I think that we don't really know how weird phones were up until the mid 1960s. So what do you know about party lines, Sarah? I feel like you must know something.
Oh, yeah. My mom might have had one at some point when she was growing up, but it's basically where you would have some number of households. I would think maybe like 4 or 5 that just all share a phone line. And if you pick it up and you hear someone else having a conversation, the courteous thing to do is to hang up because it's your neighbor's turn to be having a phone call. But you could just like listen to it, is my understanding.
That's right. Yeah. So there could be like a pretty large number of people on the same phone system. And there would be like a special ring for you and a special ring for each of your neighbors. And you would know, okay, this phone call is for me. But there was really nothing to stop anyone from listening in, which I would be doing.
Just have to try not to breathe too hard.
You have to. Yeah. And there's like the little click. You got to be real careful about it. But like when I say I would be listening.
Oh my God. I would have done it for 8 to 9 hours a day. Like the second I wasn't in school.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So in the early 1960s, it had been kind of transforming into private lines where everybody has their own line, basically the phones that we know today, or at least the phones that we knew in the 90s. And so I think that a question that I've always had about the babysitter and the man upstairs is, how is the caller calling from inside the house? Okay.
Yes.
Right.
How is he?
So there are multiple possibilities here. The caller could be calling from a separate line in the same house. Like that happens in When a Stranger Calls, when that came out in the late 70s. It's that the work phone is the other line, right?
Yeah.
But when our legend was forming in the mid 60s, having multiple phone lines in one house was so rare that only about 5% of people had them.
Right. And they were like senators and stuff, probably.
Yeah. It was like very like, you got to be like a hot dog of some kind to have
And then who cares what happens to your kids?
Yeah, exactly. They'll probably grow up to be little assholes anyway. So I wanted to dig up, like, what are the other options for that 95% of other people that are, not people who have that option in their house. So it was really hard to figure this out. But I had to turn to Reddit and Quora.
Quora. Oh, that's tough.
It's dark. I know.
Yeah.
But it was helpful in getting some anecdotal information about how one might call from a single line to the house. So like if there were 2 phones in a house that were connected to the same line, that's kind of our other possibility, right? But how do you call yourself in the 60s? One person said, back when I was a telephone installer in the 70s, so this is as close as I could really get, there was a code you could dial. We had several, depending on whether the exchange used the very old step dialing method or a newer one. You dialed the number and then hung up and the phone would ring, which seems pretty obvious. Another person said, I used to do this as a gag when I was little. You used to be able to dial 998 WXYZ, with WXYZ being the last 4 digits of your own phone number. You'd get a high-pitched tone and then the dial tone. And if you jiggled the handle, so to speak, if you tapped on the hang up quickly a few times and go back to a dial tone, then you could hang up and your own phone would ring in a second. That's how I perfected prank phone calls, doing that and then pranking my older brothers or parents.
That's beautiful.
So we can see that like it was possible during this time to do it.
I'm so happy those people responded, because this is the kind of information that is becoming lost, I feel like.
I know.
And also, like, don't you love how that reveals that phones also used to be, and like by the time we were growing up, they were beyond this. But I also remember like my mom being sort of like amazed that I couldn't figure out how to dial a rotary phone at my grandma's once. And I was like, where would I have learned to do this? You jerk, but that like the rotary phone, it works by like a spark or something, right? Because that's why you have to get the number down to the thing. I don't know. But there's like that they were so mechanical and so based on like physical things interacting with each other that they wrote you, things you could do by like you could like whistle at a certain pitch and get it to dial numbers, or you could like jiggle it a certain way and sort of get it to call itself. So cool. And just there's something really lovely and very lost about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was
because now our phones are run by tiny little men who live inside them.
Yes, and I don't like those men.
And they're doing something bad to us, I think.
Oh, yeah. The call is coming from inside the phone.
It sure is, yeah.
Okay, so now that we kind of understand the possibilities of how this urban legend, if it were real, could happen, I want to talk about a really big problem that was happening in the 1960s that I think contributed to this legend much more than anyone really out there as a folklorist has written about. And the way that I really got all this information was from, of course, newspapers.com, going microfiching. And I don't know, I feel like I've got something here and you can let me know what you think.
Oh, yeah.
So that problem that I'm talking about was obscene phone calls. Have you ever had an obscene phone call, Sarah?
No, it's just, people trying to steal my identity all day long.
All day.
Yeah. Or sell me fake insurance or whatever else.
Yep.
But this is something that I know of, I think just from kind of like reading like literature written by women, like during and about the 50s, 60s, 70s, that this was just like if you were a woman and had your name in the phone book, men would apparently just like get bored and be like, oh, there's a woman at that number. I'm going to call her and scare the shit out of her.
Yep.
While jerking off.
Yeah. Yes. I'm sure that was a big part of it. But we can see that by 1966, just the Bell Telephone Company had gotten 375,000 complaints about obscene phone calls. And just between 1964 and 1965, which I believe to be around when the legend was forming, the number of reported obscene phone calls had jumped 30% in New York City alone. Wow. So it's like, it's an epidemic.
Yeah. And I do think there are certain forms of violence against women that feel like a response to women's liberation, and men being like feeling targeted by that, very triggered. Gotta go terrorize a woman to even things out or something.
Like knock her down a peg. Like, remember that I'm here. I'm always here.
Right. She's got it. Yeah. This idea that women have to remember their place, which, certainly does seem to be cyclical.
Yeah, I sure think so. So the phone companies and the police believed that the reported, as usual, right, the reported number of these calls was much lower than the actual amount of calls that women were receiving.
Yeah. Who has the time to report all these things based on that volume?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it takes so many extra steps. And if you're already getting these calls.
And what are they going to do about it?
Yeah. And at this point, there wasn't a lot they could do about it. But the Federal Communications Commission put the number of calls in 1966 alone close to 586,000. So this is a lot. This is not a small problem. It's not like a niche incident. It's something that's affecting women all over the country all of the time. So because of, kind of what we were talking about, the way that the phone was back then, the mechanics of the phone meant that it was nearly impossible, if not impossible, to figure out who was on the other end. So that meant that although these calls were being reported, most of the time women were just, hearing things like, no, it's just somebody messing with you. Don't worry about it. It's not a problem.
Just like they always do.
Yeah. Never heard that before.
Yeah.
But so this all got me thinking about this switch between the party line and the private line and how when you're being witnessed, or at least when you have the possibility of being witnessed by 5, 10, 15 other people, you're so much less likely to make an obscene phone call. And so the private line is actually a really scary change. You know, when we talk about technology and the way that technological changes affect our psychology, I mean, you're suddenly able to be alone with an obscene caller. And that's really scary.
That's such a good point. And I feel like it's like the way sort of the present obscures our view of the past. I always have thought of the party line in terms of, well, we always know what the phone is. And it's what we basically have now, where it's you and whoever's talking to you. And it's totally private, theoretically, unless you're being loud. But that really the original concept of it that we then had to transition out of was, no, it's actually something more like a town square where like whatever you say, like there's like a very good chance that someone who you're not talking to is going to hear you and you're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah. It's almost like removing the super ego or something where you no longer have like a person doesn't have the same rules applied to them when they're not being witnessed by a group who can shame them.
And where men suddenly have like a very low effort, low stakes way to harass women and therefore jump all over it.
More after this. And now back to the show. So, all right, moving on kind of with our obscene phone history, our obscene phone call history here.
Perfect.
So by the middle of the 1960s, states were starting to pass laws that criminalized obscene phone calls. In 1965, the Senate Commerce Committee's subcommittee, because of course every committee needs a subcommittee on communications, introduced a bill making obscene phone calls a federal crime, which passed the next year, which is like all well and fine, but how do you catch them? So that comes in now as a major part of the Babysitter and the Man Upstairs urban legend. The babysitter, of course, calls the operator. The call is traced. That's kind of the central moment, I would say, of the story. And you find out that the frightening calls are coming from inside the house.
Yeah. And that's the big twist.
Big twist. Sometimes in the legend, the caller is asked to keep the person on the line long enough for the call to be traced. And we see this like in detective shows and stuff, right? It's like, you've got to keep the killer on the line for a minute so we can, you know, run around and trace the call in our giant weird boxes in the back of the phone company.
Oh yeah, those are the best ones.
Yeah. Yeah. I just watched Black Christmas again last night as a refresher, and that happens in the movie where they're has to keep the killer on the phone, and Black Christmas is good. God,
it's so good. Yeah, it does not get enough credit, I don't think.
No, and we will give it credit at the end of the episode. So the phone companies around this time created the Annoyance Call Bureau, which I like, to address the issue, and they were, you know, working tirelessly on the tech that would be required to figure out where these calls were coming from. So really, the whole reason that we started to need to figure out like call tracing was because of these obscene phone calls, which isn't necessarily surprising.
No, but I guess I would have assumed that we knew how to do that for a long time before, actually. So it's interesting that it's because of the horribleness of men for the most part that we had to innovate it. That's nice.
Yeah, anonymity is a real poison.
It's true. And we all do stuff, I think, I think almost everyone, there might be 5 or 6 exceptions, do things when we know we're not being observed we wouldn't otherwise, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, like having, you know, it's like, have I ever had an anonymous Instagram where I comment shitty things I wouldn't otherwise say? Yes. Do I do that often? No, but I have done it. And it feels kind of the same. It's like when you take the personal responsibility out, of course, people are going to act on baser instincts and act like terrible people.
Yeah. Which is like, you know, this is sort of brushes up against the idea that, oh, well, if you're an atheist or if you don't believe in hell, then why not just commit constant violent crime? And it's like, because I don't want to, Susan.
It doesn't appeal to me. Yeah.
You know, but also I think it's just the thing of like social pressure is a real force and often a a positive force within reason. And it certainly stops us from littering.
That's true. Although I've seen a lot of litter lately. So the 90s are over.
Oh, no. God damn it.
So in addition to working on this technology, which was being talked about in the papers a lot, you know, like all of this was being talked about in the newspapers a lot.
Yeah. Because it feels like there's also this idea in the air culturally in the 60s. And, you know, you and I both love the bell jar, and this sort of feels like part of this cultural production of like, can women survive on their own? Unclear. The world might be too hostile for them because of us, the men who are asking these questions. And if it's not too scary, then we're sure going to make it scarier, or we're going to make it seem scarier. Mm-hmm. And every time one of them gets murdered, we're going to talk about it for years and then not let them have credit cards.
I think that what I'm about to say is a good example of what you're talking about. So,
oh boy,
they started this like campaign that lasted from 1966 to 1969. So not a small amount of time. Mm. And they printed the same advertisement in, magazines, newspapers, you know, women's magazines. Mm-hmm. It was just all over the place. And every region of the country had this available to any woman, especially who might come across it. So let me send it to you and I'll have you kind of describe it.
Oh boy. How to deal with obscene or harassing phone calls. It's got a woman hanging up.
Mm-hmm. It says, women are the most frequent targets of obscene and harassing phone calls, a source of serious concern to us. If you are a woman, this ad is especially for you. Mm. We hope you'll never receive a malicious phone call, but if you do, here are some things that could help you. First of all, remember that troubled individuals who make obscene calls are just looking for an audience, usually a female one.
First of all, don't worry about it.
Just chill. Don't be...
First of all, calm down. You sound hysterical.
And it says they're usually looking for an audience, usually a female one. Don't be that audience, which is like somehow blaming the person receiving the call. Like, oh, you're entertaining this?
You stupid bitch.
Oh, what do you want this?
Yeah.
Callers quickly lose interest if someone refuses to talk or listen to them, which is
or you can
true.
Hang up.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just tells like, hang up, let us know. We're deeply concerned about malicious calls.
But just don't do the wrong thing, for God's sake. Exactly. You always do.
Exactly. So it's one of these things where like, you're seeing this, even if you're not receiving obscene calls, you're kind of hyper aware all the time that you could be receiving a call like this.
I was aware of it, reading about it as something I knew didn't really happen anymore. You know, it like still wigs me out.
Yeah, it's freaky. Mm-hmm. So the Bell telephone company, we're working on all these different technologies to try to trace calls, locate the perpetrators, and like actually prosecute people in some way. I'm not going to bore you with how that works technologically.
I'd like to see a movie about that, frankly.
Yeah, it would be a good like Mr. Rogers learn about crayon.
No, I'm thinking like a Ben Affleck and Matt Damon 2-hour long kind of a thing.
That could be really exciting. So all of this is to point out the idea that, like the babysitter and the man upstairs, like this telephone call that you find out is coming from inside the house, the private line really allowed these like pervert, scary individuals to pierce the domestic sphere and enter the home metaphorically, which really couldn't happen while there were party lines. Of course it could happen, but rarely would this occur.
That's so interesting. And also some of, you know, I think the way that people felt about serial killers in the 70s, whether or not this was as meaningful in terms of, you know, the way they behaved as it was meaningful to how we responded to it, which I'm not sure of. But there's always a lot of emphasis on the idea that they were freed up by the interstate system, which, you know, is an Eisenhower project, and were able to just like swoop into a small town and grab a victim and swoop right out. And it's like, I don't know how much that helps them. It probably does like a bit, but most people, I think if you did a statistical analysis, I hypothesize that you would find that they tend to stick to an area because they know how it works.
Yeah.
Like Gary Ridgway, who was just able to murder sex workers in the greater Seattle area for decades because the police didn't care very much about what he was doing, and so this idea of the serial killer as super predator who's sort of, the killer who can't be stopped, who's using the technologies we've built against us, really appealed to us as a way of looking at a person, whether or not that always lined up with the way people behave. But I think we were also responding to this fear of just like alienation from each other, and especially in America, people living far apart from each other, and this sort of bent that technology has had for a while, and certainly was having during this period. And you talking about the party lines kind of lines up with this, I think, of like separating people more and more, and us recognizing that that was a scary thing.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And it makes me think of, the thing that you and I have talked about many times, how the phone related to our experience of ghosts when the phone was invented, and they were really our current understanding of ghost as dead person who can communicate with us came totally concurrently with the invention of the telephone in the, late 1800s, because it was like, in the mid to late 1800s.
Because suddenly we were basically doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like we kind of deal with changes in communication technology by creating like legends and paranormal creations. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when that technology is the thing that brings us together. And it's like, in the case of spiritualism, we have the phone being the disembodied voice of someone far away. And we don't think about now how absolutely stunningly incredible that was, and frightening that you could suddenly talk to someone, hear their voice, and they are across the country, even across the town.
Well, and now we can, I can conjure a tiny ghost of you to talk to me in my living room, and look how insane people have become during the, spread of that technology. Absolutely. We're really losing it.
We're losing it.
We're like, what even is real? And it's like, I don't know, probably not that AI portrait of Jesus, but on the other hand, this one, I mean, they're looking more realistic all the time. You're like, is that Jesus?
I saw this video the other day of some guy who tried to use an AI lawyer in the court.
God.
And the judge was like, what's going on? And he was like, this is my counsel. And she was like, you'd never told me you were going to use an AI lawyer. And I was like, well, he didn't tell you, but also he can't do that anyway.
It's kind of like Air Bud, though. Do they say that you can't
have a dog play basketball in the league?
They're going to have to start.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's not explicitly in the rules that a dog can't play.
Yeah, which is famously how basketball works.
Anything that's not explicitly in the rules, you can do. But yeah, all that's to say, I think that the telephone is the central thing that matters in this story, and that
like the villain, really, because without a phone, a villain has to be hollering, and it's hard to be menacing when you holler from upstairs, because you're like, I'm gonna kill you, and the person downstairs is like, what? And you're like, I'm gonna kill you, and they're like, no, I'm not hungry.
Exactly. Just doesn't have packed the same punch.
No.
I think that what's also interesting about kind of the idea of babysitting, like the phone is always a cliche, and that like the babysitter's gabbing to the friends, the parents are calling to check on the kids. And, in this case, the phone is not a safe connection to others. It's a danger, a menace, something frightening.
Right. Yeah, I never thought of that, because it's like, it's like the safety of the home being compromised, which is one of the things I find so scary about this story, because you think that your home is or any home is protecting you from a madman, but really he's using it to prey on you. But also that the phone too is like supposed to be friendly technology, and it's being used against you. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I have a hypothesis about a series of crimes that I think may have contributed to this legend. But first, before I get to my ideas. I want to talk about what other folklorists have kind of always considered the best contender for the start of this urban legend in terms of its like grain of truth, right? There's often that grain of truth and then the legend. It's like kind of like a oyster, like a pearl, right? There's like this grain of sand and then around it, something crystallizes. Yeah.
Like ambergris. Like sometimes if you're a whale, you know, you eat a squid or something and you swallow a beak and it irritates your tummy and then you produce something that can be used to make really expensive perfume.
Hey, that's a good point. So do you know anything through your own urban legend studies about the murder that folklorists think was this grain of truth?
I don't think I do.
Okay.
And I could kick myself.
Yeah, you better. I'm not going to go into like a ton of detail about it, but I'm going to give you like really brief overview of this 1950 tragedy that occurred to a babysitter, right? So that's, I think, the main thing is like it happened to a babysitter.
Okay.
And there was a phone loosely involved.
Okay.
So this was March 18th, 1950, and a 13-year-old girl named Jeanette Christman is babysitting for a couple in Missouri. They have a 3-year-old kid named Gregory. He's already asleep when she gets there. So the mom says, like, all you have to do is check on this kid, do whatever you want otherwise, right? Just like hang out. But later on, the mom calls to check on the kid, to check on Jeanette, make sure everything's okay. There's no answer, but the mom's just like, well, I'm sure she just fell asleep. It happens. But then at 10:30, the local police get a call from a girl who is yelling into the phone for help, asking for them to come quick. Then the call is cut off.
Oh, God.
I know. So this is 1950. So this is like 15 years before we have anything close to like phone call tracing. So this is like something where the police actually can't really do anything unless the girl calls back because they have no idea where the call is coming from. So then the parents get home like 1 a.m. And of course, I won't describe it in detail, but it was a very gruesome scene that they stumble upon. And the phone that she called with is like lying off the hook near her. And that was all kind of reported in the paper, right? So it was like she tried to call, but, you know, she couldn't get the help that she needed. And then she was murdered.
What about the little kid?
The little kid was okay.
Oh.
Thanks for asking. Yeah, he was all right.
God.
So, I mean, we can see some of the, you know, elements, right?
Yeah.
We've got the phone, we've got the babysitter. This was a big crime in the newspapers. So many people in the country heard about this crime and followed the news as they were trying to find the killer.
Did they?
They did, but not before they racially profiled and tried to blame it all on a black man.
Yes. Well, of course.
Right? Yes. That was kind of happening all the time in the 1960s when incompetent police departments could not actually solve crimes. I mean, still the case.
Well, you know, you're right. It's still easier to just pick someone to unfairly prosecute rather than actually solving a case. You know, I mean, we can, but it's why bother?
Yeah,
is the answer some departments have.
And it really is. It's a really interesting case. I'm not going to go into it today, but I encourage everyone. There's lots of great, you know, full kind of medium pieces about the whole manhunt and the false coerced confession. You know, there's a lot of that in it. But then it did turn out that the murderer was a man who was friends with Jeanette's father.
No.
Of course, right? So he knew she was babysitting.
Oh my God.
That night he had asked her to babysit for him. So she knew exactly where she was going to be. And he was already like this huge creep that like hit on Jeanette's mom all the time and was just like really, really creepy and gross. But he wore a suit all the time. So couldn't be him.
So there you go.
Yeah. So that was, you know, the story that folklorists think, okay, this has got to be the story.
And there is like the sort of the idea of the threat being close to home and sort of the believing that there's safety within or near the family, but so often that's where the threat is coming from. And I can even see that being metabolized kind of into how the story spread, you know?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think it's, you and I talk about this all the time when we talk about stranger danger, satanic panic,
all the big ones.
It's usually someone you know, not a stranger.
Yeah. And sometimes it is a stranger, but statistically, it's, you know, we need as Americans to be told more often to not trust the people in our own families.
Yes.
You know, not that we should all be going around wildly paranoid like we're an invasion of the body snatchers or something, but I just mean that like we can't sort of really combat abuse at its source unless we start looking at the family as a place where, based on sort of conventional family values and sort of patriarchal power structures, these are the people who are allowed to abuse you with impunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And teaching kids a little bit more insubordination would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have our babysitter element, right?
Mm-hmm.
We kind of have our phone element, but it feels kind of like a stretch to me to connect that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the big twist isn't there, but that's what kind of makes it a campfire story and not just a thing that happened, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But during my research on obscene phone calls, stumbled upon a true crime story that felt like it could have definitely contributed to the tale. And it was happening closer to the time that we think that the tale was forming. And that was 1963.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the Career Girl murders?
Yes, I have.
Okay, cool. I didn't know if you would.
I don't know that much about them, but I know of them.
You've heard of them, yeah. So on August 28th, 1963, Janice Wiley, who's 21, she's a writer at Newsweek, and then Emily Hoffert, who's 23 and is a school teacher, were found murdered in their apartment in Manhattan. The apartment was ransacked and the women were tied together with torn sheets. So again, another kind of brutal scene. I don't want to give any more details. I don't think it's necessary, but Janice's father was a really prominent ad executive and Emily's was a surgeon. So there was this, big lens on this particular crime because it was a crime happening to an affluent, pair of girls, right?
Yeah.
The crimes were very quickly dubbed in the media as the Career Girl murders, which is really loaded. And immediately it became this dangerous symbol of the tens of thousands of women who were moving to big cities, starting careers, and then the dangers that they faced, which heavily implied kind of a punishment.
Right. Or the idea of like, maybe you won't be murdered horribly, but you're a career girl. It could happen.
It could happen.
You've got a risk factor.
Absolutely. And I mean, it was like such a big part of the narrative that they started to write about this killer as if he were killing career girls as his like modus operandi, right?
Right. As if that was the motive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was his MO.
And they're like, listen, we're pissed off about it. So why wouldn't he be?
Exactly. And there wasn't really any like evidence for that. So that was really like a lot of projection coming from, I'm sure, the mostly men who were writing at the newspapers and the police as well.
Yeah. This is all down the street from Looking for Mr. Goodbar as a phenomenon.
What's that?
So Looking for Mr. Goodbar is a best-selling novel that became a Richard Gere movie, but that's like very, very, very closely based on a case that happened in New York City, I think in the early to mid 70s. That was like a big story where basically it was the way it was reported was that this woman who was murdered by a one-night stand who she took home was described in this sort of like baffled way, but as like she was an educator who worked with disabled children, and yet she was also promiscuous. And it's like, gee, how could it? Unbelievable, but it was just like, what are you saying, and it felt like she was, sort of hung out as an example, or like her corpse was used as an example of like, if you sleep around, they could always just kill you. So yeah, be a nun.
I mean, and in a lot of ways that's similar to an urban legend. It's like we're pulling a moral out of some kind of frightening story. And that I feel like is exactly what was happening with the career girl murders, because again, there was like not really any good reason to assume that they were being killed for some sort of...
There were more women being murdered in New York that year who didn't have jobs, I would wager.
Yes. I would wager that they were being killed by their husbands.
But, better to be killed by someone you live with, I guess.
Better the devil you know. So part of the story that has kind of since disappeared, like if you read the Wikipedia, it doesn't mention this at all. But when I was reading,
newspapers.com.
Yeah, newspapers.com chronologically.
Reading about Candyman.
Trying to experience the story the way that someone would who was following it in real time. That's kind of like how I like to approach these stories. And for the first few weeks, because they did not know who the killer was for quite some time, but for the first few weeks, they were mentioning in every article that she had been receiving threatening and obscene phone calls in the weeks leading up to the murder.
That's really interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
So they were coming from a man who was calling himself Dr. Hunter, which is really scary to me. But it didn't give a lot of detail about, what that caller was saying. But I know that it was like threatening. And I know that it was like things like, I'm going to kill you.
What I would like to wager is that perhaps what people didn't put together, what men working on this case didn't put together fast enough, is that sometimes when you're a woman, a man says, I'm going to kill you. And then another completely unrelated man kills you. And they never had anything to do with each other. It's just that men hate you.
You might be on something, Sarah. Okay. So then they start to try to connect this case to a girl who had been murdered a few months before. Her name was Beverly Sammons, and she was living in Boston, and there was like some similarities in the crime scene, but the main similarity was that she had also been receiving similar threatening phone calls before it actually happened.
But really, probably the case was that there's so many women, especially who lived without men, are receiving threatening phone calls that inevitably some of them are going to get murdered.
That's exactly true. It's like the statistics of these two, like the Venn diagram.
That's so... Yeah. I'm not going to say depressing, because I don't want to get depressed about this, because when I think about it, I'm so angry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's horrible. So then it's all compounded by the fact that they're like creating a lot of fear at the same time. There are all of these news articles coming out at the same time that are like talking about obscene phone calls in the same way that we were talking about them prior to this true crime story, but are then linking that to this murder.
And then it's like, if you're told like, hey, are you getting obscene phone calls? You could be murdered. It's like, you're like, of course I am.
Yeah.
I'm a woman. We all get obscene phone calls back now.
Yeah, exactly.
This also makes me think of, not to bring Ted Bundy into everything, but like so much of the coverage of the murders that he committed, and also the kind of legacy that he's had in true crime books, and because things boil down to an essence that doesn't always completely line up with what was going on, because not all of the women that he killed were students,
right?
But we remember him as a killer of students, and a number of them were, and it was emphasized, I think, because we had a bit of an agenda about like teenage girls are going to college and they're learning and they're becoming independent and they're having sex and they're using birth control and they're getting abortions. And is that too much freedom? Let's just maybe focus extra on the fact that these girls were in college when this happened to them. They're serial killers, college, phone calls, jobs. No, just stay home, never leave. Then you won't get murdered by a stranger. You'll be murdered by someone you love.
Even though you're in your house, and you will get murdered by a stranger if you
that's
have
true.
A phone and could contact anyone outside the home.
And by all means, don't go out on a date. Don't go parking, for the love of God.
Okay, so I'm going to read you one article that came out that I feel is a good example of the kind of messaging that was coming out after this murder.
Oh, no.
It's called Crank Calls Vex Career Girls in Gotham.
But Batman is on the case.
Don't worry. It was well past midnight when the telephone rang in the small apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side. A girl stared for several seconds at the telephone by her bed before she lifted the receiver.
This reporter had just had sex with her.
Yeah. Hello, she said. The caller laughed and said nothing. The girl slammed down the receiver and fell back onto the bed, sobbing. Like hundreds of other girls in this city of 8 million, she has been the victim of a crank caller. The plight of many of the city's thousands of unmarried career girls came into sharp focus last week after 2 women were stabbed to death. One had been pestered by a crank caller.
Women, get married. Men can't call you then.
Exactly. It's like, exactly.
If you get married, you have to talk to men more often. Wake up.
Wake up. Police set up 2 special telephone extensions to receive reports from women who had been annoyed by such callers in recent weeks. Some callers just breathe heavily into the mouthpiece or giggle or laugh until the girl hangs up the receiver. Others attempt to set up meetings with their victims. A great majority of the callers keep up a steady stream of obscenity and profanity until the girl hangs up. Many of the women and girls reporting their experiences to police on the special extensions said they had been threatened with bodily harm and even death if they failed to agree to a meeting. One high police official expressed doubt that there is any connection between the slayings of the 2 girls and the crank telephone calls. Quote, "These fellows get their kicks by making calls and it usually ends there," he said. Nevertheless, calls continue to come into the headquarters from girls living in all parts of the city who frankly admit that they cringe when their telephone rings late at night or early in the morning. So there were, again, like hundreds of calls coming in from women who had been really scared by this series of murders. At some point during the investigation, they arrest a truck driver who knew one of the girls' fathers. And it's like in a very friend of a friend way. Like the connection is extremely loose.
Don't let your dad have friends, I guess. Don't have a dad.
I guess. Yeah, you know.
Be born out of the sea foam.
Bursting forth from the forehead.
Nope, still a dad. And your dad
yeah, that's true. I guess you're right.
Problematic.
Yes, it is. This truck driver admitted that he made a bunch of obscene phone calls to different women all the time. And he said it was because it gave him an emotional lift.
Good God.
He's just like, guys, I just need a little emotional lift.
It just makes me feel good. It's like, God, put on a gel mask and listen to Pure Moods.
God, get a freaking pedicure.
Yeah, seriously. I appreciate that degree of candor, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was, it took a minute to pull it out of him, but maybe not. Maybe he just walked into the police station being like, guys, right? An emotional lift, right? And they're all like, yeah.
Like, yeah, exactly. But seriously, like, now that men have to like act a little bit sneakier about hating women, well, I guess not all of them, but it does feel like back then when you were pretty much allowed to abuse your wife, that there was more candor about something that I feel like we maybe overlook because, I don't know, we do things culturally in extremes. So if we decide something is a problem, we're like, and everyone who does it is a monster and a normal man couldn't do it. And it's like, no, normal men do it. Normal men are a really big problem. We need to talk about normal men.
Yeah.
Statistically normal ones, not healthy ones. But like that really one of the things about abuse that like we don't teach enough is that people do it because it makes them feel good.
Yeah. Yes. The trail goes cold. But of course, like any case, the police are under a bunch of pressure to find the killer, working around the clock, I'm sure. But then, of course, what do they do but find a 19-year-old black man to arrest?
Wow, they stole the Missouri cops' idea.
Isn't that interesting that it's the same story between these two?
It is. It's almost like a pattern. Let's look for a serial killer pattern to ignore our police pattern.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Later, it came out that though he confessed to the murder, it was under, he was beaten by the cops until he confessed.
A coerced confession. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was a coerced confession. And I do think that this particular detail, though it's not really related to our story is pretty sad. This man his name was George Whitmore. And at the time that he was allegedly committing the murders, he was actually watching live footage of Martin Luther King giving his I Have a Dream speech.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, that is really, yeah.
Another horrific aside.
Yeah.
So then it's like a year and a half after the murder, right? That's a long time for people to be worrying about this killer.
Yeah. And to have something be open-ended.
And to really be getting these calls and never know how connected it is. If it was connected, is this person the person that killed these other career girls, right? It's just this sense of anxiety in New York.
Yeah. And will it happen again?
Exactly. Yeah.
Which if you're a career girl in New York, you probably do think about.
Of course.
I certainly would.
More after this. And now back to the show. So yeah, it's a year and a half after the murder, and police finally figure out that the murderer was this like local petty criminal who lived a few blocks away. He'd broken in to try to burglarize the apartment and then,
got surprised.
Yeah, got surprised and killed them because he was afraid that they would report him to police. He didn't want to go back to prison.
So often the reason men kill people too, it feels like, is because they're like, hey, you startled me. Their motives are not interesting. I can't stress it enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's a much more complicated story than I'm doing right now. But I think it's interesting that 1 year after the murders, Janice's father actually wrote a handbook called Career Girl Watch Your Step, which was warning career women about safety and the need to be aware.
Oh my God. I mean, he's grieving. I get it. But good Lord, why scare everyone,
I know. Yeah. And it's not necessarily like, it's like him reacting to his trauma, but it's bigger than that because they weren't murdered for being career girls. That's not what happened.
Right. They were murdered for, either just being exactly where they were or for being girls, might have been a part of it. But but also it's a case where like the obsession with category of victim reveals a lot more about the people investigating the crime than the people who committed it. Exactly.
And that was like only one of many other handbooks that were then, as a result of this case, directed at single working women and how they could stay safe.
Yeah. And quite a few serial killers target old women,
it's true.
And were at the time. And I can't think of any big safety initiative about like, hey, old women, you're on thin ice.
I feel like when Ronald Reagan was running, he used like old women are getting murdered and I need to be tough on crime. I remember some vague statement.
Right.
Yeah. But these handbooks were also put out by the police, public safety departments. And it was always about how to prevent these attacks and all the ways that you needed to take action to not get murdered, right?
Yeah. And I get that there's like probably some usable advice in there, but it's just the fact that it seemed to occur to none of the men involved, basically, to be like, what if we should stop acting like men are just sort of this force of nature that has no choice but to kill women? What if we tried to make them not do that?
Yeah. So what we have in this story in terms of the elements of the babysitter and the man upstairs is obviously we have the phone call that ends up in murder. It's not babysitter specific, but I think that the kind of anti-feminist messages are similar to the ones we talked about.
And career girl implies that you're like a girl who's just accidentally been given a job, and you're like running around and you're like, I hope nobody figures out I'm just a girl.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I'm literally just a girl.
Just a girl. So I think it is possible that the Jeanette Chrisman murder and the murder of the career girls, they could have combined in some way.
I completely believe it.
Yeah. I don't know.
It makes total sense to me because it's like the lore that gets passed around about sort of the dangers of existing as a certain type of person. They kind of merge and react against each other and stuff. And this feels like its DNA is very much in that story.
Yeah, definitely. And the next part of this, the last part I would like to talk about is my new position, and maybe it's a position other people have already, but I really, really, really feel like the Babysitter and the Man Upstairs urban legend is the main reason that we have slasher movies.
Yeah. Whoa, this is exciting.
I know.
Okay, make your case, counselor.
Well, I just think if we look to what is considered the first, and nothing, whenever you say it's the first, it's never really the first, but the first time it pierced into the mainstream culture.
Or like the first sort of full flower. Like, for example, your favorite movie, one of your favorite movies, The Blair Witch Project, is not technically the first found footage film. There's like The Last Broadcast, there's Cannibal Holocaust, there's stuff. There's Ghost Watch, obviously.
Of course.
But people loved Ghost Watch, but like the movies that were sort of preceding it were not movies that like were hugely mainstream successful.
Right.
They were genre movies. They sort of seeped into people's consciousnesses. But then you have the Blair Witch Project, where suddenly it's all anyone can talk about. It's an obsession. People are like, is it real? Yeah. Is it not real? I'm asking Jeeves. I can't figure out if these kids are dead or alive. And like suddenly it just sort of like takes over the public mind for a little while.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. And that is, people will often say the first slasher was Halloween, which to me is ridiculous.
Which is like the Blair Witch Project maybe in this analogy.
But Black Christmas to me would be kind of our original slasher that involves a killer coming after young people, whether they be teenagers or college students.
And with like a POV camera strapped to his head, which is an important element of the slasher, where we see him, walking around a lot, breathing very heavily, which is important, I guess, because he's making obscene phone calls and and are in that killer POV in an unsettling way.
Yes. And for anyone who, spoilers for Black Christmas from...
Yeah, skip ahead. If you haven't seen Black Christmas, really, you should watch it. It's very good.
Yes, it's really, really good.
Directed by the same guy who did A Christmas Story, which is interesting.
That is so... It's like, what's this guy?
He just loves Christmas.
He loves Christmas. And I do think, this is what Miranda said when we were watching it last night. She said that the reason that it probably wasn't anywhere near as commercially successful as Halloween was that it was about Christmas, and you want to watch a slasher about Halloween. Simple.
I want to watch a slasher about Christmas, but yeah, I also love how Halloween was clearly not written to be about Halloween, and then it was like, oh, and also it's about Halloween, and they just kind of threw it in there. But like, those kids are not doing any Halloween activities.
No, it's very, very loosely related to anything Halloween. I guess just the day it happened.
It's Halloween if you have a really bad immune system as a child.
So the writers of Black Christmas said that it was inspired by an actual babysitter murder that happened where the babysitter was receiving.
They heard about it from their cousin.
Yeah, exactly. Receiving phone calls from a stranger hiding in the house. But there is, of course, no incident. And that was probably just them doing a little bit of marketing for the movie, which I always love.
Totally. Oh, yeah. Or they really believed that, but they just were like, yeah, I don't know. It happened in Duluth. I don't have the paper, but you could probably find it.
Yeah, totally. Talk about, and it's like the false memory of like thinking you read it in the paper too, I think is like a real thing that can happen.
Yeah. Because also past a certain age, like there's a certain amount of information in your brain, but you don't really know where it came from.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. And you just do your best.
Yeah. And just like try to piece it together in a way that is, has a narrative form, because our memories are just this like loose pocket of little tiny toys that we have to set up into a manger. That's my metaphor.
Some chicken lob. I would also love to point out that Black Christmas, in a way that's also fairly unique for a movie, has a character who's like, I'm pregnant and I'm going to get an abortion. And her boyfriend's like, I don't want you to. And she's like, well, I'm gonna. Yeah. And it's a question to an extent of like, oh, did her boyfriend go crazy and now he's killing everyone because she's not having his baby? Which again, it's like very much an existential fear that young women, if they don't already have, are being asked to have by the culture that they're in.
Which was also really interesting because this movie came out in 1974, which is a year out? Isn't Roe v. Wade?
The year after Roe v.
73?
Wade. Yeah. But also made in Canada. So I don't know.
That's true. Yeah.
And we have Olivia Hussey, who's British.
I know, who then goes on to be Bill's wife in the It movie from 1990, which I love.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Which is a really amazing career arc. I don't know what she did in between, but.
Yeah, good old Audra. Never go with your husband to his hometown when he has something mysterious to do. Just stay on set, I would say.
Everyone in a relationship can have their own secrets. I believe.
And if you don't let them have secrets, he will end up being saved for later by a giant spider.
In a giant, weird cocoon web. And then you have to ride on a bike on the handlebars to remember who you really are. And then you wake up and kiss in the middle of the street while a bunch of cars crash around you. So then we have a few years later, When a Stranger Calls, which is the movie that is the most directly inspired by the legend. And I'm sure is part of...
the most direct transliteration, basically.
Yes. And, in that we have a babysitter murdered by a man calling from a phone upstairs. It's exactly the urban legend.
There you go.
But the urban legend was well established by the time that the movie came out. So it probably helped popularize it to more people.
Yeah.
But it was only fictionalizing. Well, I guess it's already fiction, but it was,
bringing it to a wider audience and sort of giving it strong images. And I haven't seen it in a long time. There are things I really like about it, but what I also remember is that it kind of shoots itself in the foot by having the first 45 minutes be the original Babysitter and the Man Upstairs story. And then they're like, cut, and she's fine, and she's Carol Kane, and she grew up, and she's married now. And now it's happening again. And it's like, why not just do it once instead of 2 smaller times? What's that about?
I agree. And the remake...
I haven't seen that.
It's 2006. It's bad, but good.
We were not making a lot of good horror movies in 2006 for whatever reason.
No, it was not a good time for horror.
Final Destination 3 was pretty good.
Oof. Yeah. Is that the roller coaster one?
Yeah. Tanning beds.
Yeah. Love it. Tanning bed. Yeah. Great. New Final Destination fucking rules, in case anybody hasn't seen it.
I really want to see it. I haven't seen it yet. I heard there's an MRI in it.
You'll love it. Dude, yes. And its opening is a depiction of basically the Space Needles opening. Yeah. No. So as a Seattleite who has gone up the Space Needle many times and imagined all of the horrific ways that I could die being up there.
Yeah.
Great. Really effective. Loved it.
What I was trying to explain to my mom about the Final Destination movies, which I don't think she bought, and I probably said to you before, is that if you are an anxious person generally, then it feels like Final Destination gives your brain a break, where it's like, why don't I just tell you the worst thing that could happen?
Yep.
And you're like, thank you. I don't have to do anything. This is amazing.
No, it's so good. God, it's good. And of course, then we have so many horror movies, including Halloween, in which the babysitter is killed by someone in the house. It's not the same, killed by the brother, which again is a murderer within the domestic sphere that you don't expect.
Yeah. And then we get into the Friday the 13th. This is where it's at the summer camp.
Yep.
Where you're supposed to be not comfortable, but safe.
Yeah. Yep.
Also, the original Michael Myers in Halloween was played by Aaron Moran's brother, aka Joni from Happy Days' brother. And I think that's really quite brilliant casting.
Wow.
Because you're like, what does the ultimate evil look like? He looks like Aaron Moran's brother.
That's cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, I like that one.
So yeah, we have the babysitter and the man upstairs kind of being this lifeblood throughout the genre. And then we get to 1996 and the first 13 minutes of Scream.
Oh my God. Yeah, of course.
Is paying homage to When a Stranger Calls directly.
Yeah.
So the story then comes back in the 90s to kind of create this whole renaissance of the slasher film.
Because now guys can use the phone, but use voice changing technology and who knows who it is.
I know. It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, this is an urban legend that we owe a huge debt of gratitude to if we are slasher fans. And I think that's part of why it's my favorite legend it gave me a lot. in my life.
It's like the roots of like the particular form of folklore that we love so much. And like slashers are one of the least appreciated. I mean, I think now they've come to be accepted and loved by enough people that like they're not going anywhere. But like historically, especially in the 80s, they are one of the least respected genres of horror. And I wonder, like, how would you defend them?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know if it's like, I almost am like, if you know, you know, like if you're compelled toward them, you are.
Yeah, you either like it or you don't. It's like capers.
Yes, I don't like capers.
I love capers.
But, you know, and I don't look at them and think I want to put that in my mouth. And I look at a slasher movie and I think I want to put that in my mouth. But yeah, I think it's one of those things like if you get it pretty early on, even if you don't start watching horror early on. Like, for example, Miranda was always really interested in horror movies, but was really scared of them. So she would read the description. So she was compelled toward them. But even though she like wasn't ready for them, like they were in her mind,
they were out there,
you know, she was kind of obsessed with them already. And I don't know how to pitch it, because it's just, you know, if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, that's okay.
I do think that it scratches a similar itch to urban legends, where it's like allegedly kind of helpful to you, you know, where you're like, and you know, the slashers develop their lore where it's like, well, it's a bunch of people at sort of an isolated location, or just kind of sealed off from the rest of the world, typically. And also very much like an Agatha Christie, or just like a typical kind of, you know, country house English murder mystery. And I think that actually is a bigger antecedent of the slasher than it gets credit for. And actually, I think one of the first slasher movies is And Then There Were None, which is an adaptation of an Agatha Christie novel, which has had 2 different racist titles. But it's about 10 people on a remote island, and one of them is the killer.
That's fun.
And people are getting killed one by one. But who? And you have to figure it out. And they're all getting suspicious and weird. And also, I think Jurassic Park is a slasher when you think about it. Because they're on an island. It's just a dinosaur instead of a killer. But there's also a theme in the slasher of, we may be through the past, but the past isn't through with us, right? Yeah. And something from the past coming to get you as well.
Yes.
And I think that Americans specifically have an obsession with guilt over something that we did or that our parents did, but that nobody wants to talk about, because that's like a cornerstone of our culture.
Yeah, like a national guilt as well. Yeah.
Totally. And so I think that slashers are just like one of the important, I think, questions when you're relating to culture is like, well, if people are responding to this, then why are they responding to this? Because we can't tell them not to be, because they are. Yeah. So what's going on?
Definitely.
And I think just there's so many themes in slasher movies that you don't find in other bigger movies where people were paying attention.
Yeah.
And also I like them. I just like them. You can't control what you like, and I like them.
Just like them. And I mean, the other kind of main aspect of them is the place where you're supposed to be safe,
right? And
that place being compromised in a way that you don't expect. And you know, that's the babysitter and the man upstairs, and that is the issue of obscene phone calls in the 1960s. You know, as we said, it was piercing the domestic sphere. It was like suddenly, for all intents and purposes, a strange man is in your house.
Yeah. There's also, I think, the element of like, girls, don't punch above your weight, you know, because there's the thing of like, when you're babysitting, like, it's not your house. Like, you have to take care of the house and the kid and make sure nothing bad happens. But like, you're sort of a temporary steward for something that you aren't actually capable of being responsible for long term. And I think there's something interesting about that being the story that we got from, you know, if we believe the connection you're making with the career girl murders, which I do, then it's taking sort of a fear of what's going to happen to sort of young adult women out into the world and comparing them to the babysitter, you know, who like is responsible for something that she can't actually reasonably be responsible for.
Oof, that's good.
Thank you.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you know, we have of course, still connected, I think, although we didn't go into it as much, is the punishment of the mother and father for the frivolity,
for leaving their kids with a strange woman. Yeah.
Yeah. And the like idea that like now that we are in, the 50s and 60s, we have this like disposable income, like moms and dads are going out dancing and partying and they are
not dancing,
but this leaving of the parental units from the nuclear family that should be the sole focus of their attention.
Yes.
And, mainly that falls on the mothers, of course. But there is this like also underlying anxiety of like the father who leaves the house and is not there to protect the children, right? And leaves this woman in charge.
Well, I don't know. He should stay home, threshing wheat if he's so worried or something.
This legend is so like, it's a rich text and there are so many ways to look at it and so many messages that you can find in it. And I think that's part of the reason that it's my favorite urban legend and that it's the most enduring and lasting and influential urban legend that we have. And it was like so nice to parse through it and microfiche it today with you, Sarah. So thank you so much.
I loved this. I love getting to hear your hypothesis.
Yeah.
And I concur.
I like it.
How do you think Adventures in Babysitting fits into all this, though?
I have no idea because I've never experienced it. This is when I start to be like too much of a boy, not to be binary about it.
Yeah, but one of the kids is this little girl who's obsessed with Thor, and then they get their windshield repaired, and Vincent D'Onofrio is the repair guy, and she thinks he's Thor, but Thor in disguise, and he's like being a jerk, and she's like, I know what the problem is. You don't have your special helmet because you always normally help people. And so she like gives him her little Thor helmet that she wears everywhere, and he's like, you're giving this to me, kid? And then he's like, all right, take the car. You've melted my icy heart. And then he gives her back the helmet. He's like, hey, kid, I got one of these at home.
Wow.
It's Vincent D'Onofrio's first big role, along with Full Metal Jacket. Wow. They came out the same year, confusingly.
That is really confusing.
It's really, really great.
Well, thank you.
But I would argue that we come full circle in that because Adventures in Babysitting was produced, I think, by Deborah Hill, who produced Halloween.
Oh my God.
And worked with John Carpenter. And it's about Elizabeth Shue having to like take her babysitting charges into big city Chicago to rescue her friend who tried to run away to the bus station.
Okay.
And then chickened out. Mm-hmm. And they have all kinds of sometimes racist big city misadventures. And then they triumphantly get back home and the parents have no fucking clue what happened.
Wow. Wow. So it does kind of encourage the opposite message of like, get out there, girls.
Yeah. It's like, be a babysitter, deal with psychos. You'll probably win.
You'll be fine. Yeah.
You're Elizabeth Shue.
Uh-huh. God. Well, love that. All right. Well, Sarah, until next time, babysit safe.
Until next time, have you checked the children?
This was American Hysteria. The music in this episode is by Magpie Cinema Club. Find them wherever you listen to music or at the link in our episode notes. Make sure you listen to Sarah on You're Wrong About and You Are Good wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support our show, and to be honest with you, we really need support right now, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/American Hysteria, or you can subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll get ad-free episodes as well as bonus content, like the other podcast I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we cover, or stories that we know that you'll love. That's patreon.com/American Hysteria, or subscribe on Apple Plus. If you have a second, leave us a 5-star review on the app of your choosing. It's another great way to help out our show, and you can follow us on social media at American Hysteria Podcast. You can also leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline about a tale that you remember from growing up, or even a story that you've heard recently, and we might do an entire investigation about it. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith, and I'm your host, Chelsey Weber Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have a great week.